drugs, or ideas, what you consume influences who you become. On the Mind and Matter podcast, we learn together from the best scientists and thinkers alive today about how your mind-body reacts to what you feed it. Before starting Mind and Matter, I spent 10 years in academia doing scientific research. I got a PhD in neuroscience where I focused on neuroendocrinology and the neurobiology of behavior, and before that, I specialized in molecular, developmental, and evolutionary genetics. I use my scientific background to help parse and translate the information that guests share on the podcast. In addition to the podcast, I write long-form written content inspired by the show where I integrate what I've learned across episodes. I also have a free weekly newsletter where I provide you with upcoming guests, share links, and provide commentary on scientific studies and research that I'm reading, and more. Visit mindandmatter.substack.com to find all of my content. You are about to listen to the full episode, but there will be 1 to 2 short ads immediately following this before the conversation. If you would like to hear ad-free episodes and get early access before they release more widely, become a paid subscriber at the Mind and Matter Substack at mindandmatter.substack.com. Becoming a paid subscriber is a way to directly support my efforts, allowing me to make more episodes and higher quality episodes, and also helping to free up my time so that I can spend more of it on doing research and synthesizing results from the podcast and from the literature so that I can do more things like writing on the Substack, putting more content into the newsletter, and getting these things out more frequently. So if you want to support the show and get ad-free episodes, go to mindandmatter.substack.com. Hey everyone, I want to take just a minute to tell you about a really cool health monitoring device I've been using called Lumen. It's a handheld, pocket-sized device with a sleek design. The Lumen device measures CO2 levels in your breath, which allows their technology to determine the extent to which your body is burning fats versus carbohydrates. Lumen helps improve your metabolic flexibility, your body's efficiency in shifting between using fats and carbs for energy. I use this device in the morning or before bed or after meals or after workouts to track my metabolism. With just a couple weeks of use, I learned a lot about which foods were causing my body to burn mostly fat, mostly carbs, or both, as well as how long I needed to fast and how hard I needed to exercise to promote fat burning. Being able to track whether your body is burning fat versus carbs will help you figure out how your body responds to your lifestyle and whether or not your weight loss and fitness strategies are actually working. Lumen is great for anyone looking to optimize their health for either weight loss or athletic performance. Their easy-to-use app allows you to track your results together with what you're eating and how you're exercising, and it syncs with other devices like the Apple Watch. Click the link in the episode description to learn more and use the code MINDMATTER, MINDMATTER, to get 10% off your Lumen device today. That's on top of the site-wide sale they are currently running, and the Lumen device is eligible to be paid for with FSA and HSA health accounts. Check out the link in the episode description for more info. Professor Herman Pontzer, thank you very much for joining me.
Glad to be here.
You want to just start off by telling everyone a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Hold on. Let me just make sure this is not crazy. Good. So I can't do self-view while I'm doing this because otherwise it's like a weird Pavlovian thing. I can't not look at myself, my shiny head. Hi, I'm Herman. Oh,
go ahead. No, I was going to say, you're centered. You're fine.
Good. I'm Herman Pontzer. I'm a professor of evolutionary anthropology and global health at Duke University and the author of a new book called Adaptable.
Adaptable. And so what's the basic premise of the book?
Yeah, so Adaptable is all about how your body works and why you ought to care, because so many of the big questions we wrestle with in society today, whether it's race or gender or IQ or when does life begin or what should I eat for dinner, all of these big topics that we are wrestling with fundamentally rest on how we understand our bodies and how we think they work and how they work differently. And so to have some fluency in that and get into some of those discussions, that's the focus of the book.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we'll talk about today is how different bodies work differently, different human bodies within the species Homo sapiens, but how that's also changed over time, and then how we compare to other animals like other primates. And you've written a lot about lots of different topics on these different subjects. What do you consider yourself academically? Is your background mostly in anthropology? Were you a primatologist? What's sort of your academic history here?
Sure. So undergraduate and graduate degrees are all in anthropology, in sort of with a focus on biological anthropology. But I would consider myself a physiologist, basically, a physiologist who works on humans. And what that means is, in today's academia, in the US anyway, if you work on humans, you're either in a medical program or in an anthropology program because biology departments generally don't have human biology researchers.
And you've written a lot about primate evolution, how humans compare to that. I actually want to start out on a paper that you wrote, a number of years ago now, but it's
Mhm.
basically a comparison of metabolism between humans and our most closely related living primate cousins, chimps, gorillas, and so forth.
Mhm.
And the first sentence in that paper says variation in life history reflects evolved differences in energy expenditure. Can you break that down for us? What is life history? What is energy expenditure? And what does that statement mean?
Yeah, so life history is the pace at which an organism, any organism, develops, grows up, and then reproduces, because that's the evolutionary goal of any organism, and then grows old and eventually dies. And so that kind of the pace of life is life history. And it's something that evolves, right? So you can have shorter development periods or longer development periods. Life expectancies of different species are not just sort of, random. They evolve as well. So to grow up takes energy, to reproduce takes energy, to keep your body from breaking down as you grow older, all of that takes energy. And so we can think about life history and energy expenditure as really tightly related phenomena.
Yeah, and when we think about that, we immediately notice that there's some pretty clear trade-offs that we tend to see,
Yeah.
across animals and organisms. There's only so much energy an animal is going to be able to obtain and create and utilize,
Yeah.
depending on what it's doing. And if you put more energy into one thing, that's going to leave less in your energy budget to do other things. And so, in general, when we think about these trade-offs, we might notice that okay, if a species allocates a lot to reproduction, producing a lot of babies early on in life, there's less left over to do other things. And so those species tend to say live less long than other species. And so, different life histories reflect those trade-offs. But then we come to this, what you call the human paradox, which is, okay, we're a naturally fertile population, at least we were until pretty recently. We have a
Yeah.
lot of babies compared to other creatures like us, like other primates. They're bigger. And there's more of them. So that's more energy. So then you would think, oh, there's less energy left over to say have a big long life, and yet that's not what we see in humans. We are fertile compared to other primates. Our babies are bigger, they have extended developmental periods, but we also live a long time. So what is
Yeah.
this human paradox here?
Yeah, well, that's just it. Somehow, rather than seeing trade-offs when we look at humans, we're seeing that, not only do we have long lives, which must take energy, we also have lots of babies, and they're big compared to other apes. So that must take energy. And then, you might think, well, maybe we're saving energy in other ways, but actually, we also have big brains, right? Brains
Mhm.
are incredibly expensive. The human brain, burns 300 kilocalories a day, which is the equivalent of running like a 5K every day. And, we also are more physically active, at least, until very recently, than other apes are. So, yeah, there doesn't seem to be anywhere that we're saving energy. And instead, it seems like all of the kind of traits that make us different from other apes and special are energetically expensive, all of them.
Mhm. So it's not obvious at first blush where this trade-off is being spoken for.
Right.
We don't seem to be taking the energy from one part of our life history and putting it somewhere else. So it's almost as if there's extra energy here somehow. you know, Before we get to sort of the work that you've done and what your answer is today,
Mhm.
what have some of the traditional explanations or hypotheses been around how you might start to explain this?
Sure. So the classic idea, and this actually goes back to the 1800s. This is sort of an early post-Darwin idea. The first, I mean, even kind of pre-Darwin, like Goethe talks about this. But anyway, not with humans specifically, but the idea that there are these trade-offs. And so the first anthropology, human evolution kind of version of this comes out in the 1800s, but it really becomes kind of canon with a really important paper in 1995 by Leslie Aiello and Peter Wheeler. Uh, and it's this idea that to grow a big brain, to evolve a big brain, I should say, humans have had to evolve a smaller gut.
Mhm.
And so your gut, different organs are sort of different in how many calories they burn per minute. Some organs are really expensive, we talk about. Some organs are less so. Fat, for example, burns hardly any energy at all. Skin is pretty quiet, but brains are really active and really energetically expensive, and so are your digestive tract and liver. And so the idea in this Aiello and Wheeler paper in 1995, they say, well, humans have evolved a smaller gut, probably because we eat meat, which is easier to digest and more energy dense. And now more recently, because we cook our food as well, so that both of these things have shrunk how much our digestive tracts need to do. And that has freed energy up for something else. And in our case, you wouldn't expect this in every species case, but in our case, those extra calories, selection, evolution has favored those extra calories to go to big brains. And so for a long time, I guess now for 30 years, right, 30 years ago, that became just canon, right? That was accepted as the reason and the why and the how that humans have evolved these expensive traits.
So the basic idea is, okay, we've got these big brains to explain, and we've got this human paradox to explain. So the basic idea here is to have a bigger, more expensive brain, you've got to take that energy from somewhere else. And perhaps humans took it away from organs in the GI tract. And so you basically have let's just call it a smaller gut overall. It's using less energy. And then that energy is taken and used to create a big brain. That's the idea.
That's the idea. And importantly, they didn't talk about the fact that we have bigger babies and more of them. They didn't talk about the lifespan issue, right, in that paper. That wasn't the focus of the paper. That's not a cut on that paper, but they just didn't focus on those things, which we know are also expensive things. So even that paper didn't explain everything, but it was a first crack at this question about how do we do this? How do we have an expensive brain, for example?
Yeah. And so, I mean, to answer this, at the end of the day, eventually people can just look at these things, how anatomically and physiologically, what do the energetics of all these different organs look like? How big are they, so to speak, literally, and, in other ways in terms of how energy intensive they are. Let's build some vocabulary for people, because one of the things you've done in your research is you've looked at things like basal metabolic rate, total energy expenditure, and so forth across species. So we've got this human paradox to explain. We've got these long lives. We've got these big brains. We have to explain, where the energy is coming from this. Are we taking it away from certain organs? Do we change something about our metabolism and how it's working in other ways? Let's start with total energy expenditure. What is that, and what are its major components?
Right. So total energy expenditure is kind of what it sounds like. It's all the calories that your body burns over a 24-hour period. And that includes everything your body needs to do, from the kind of background maintenance kind of physiological tasks like an immune system and your heartbeat and keeping your nervous system going and everything, to the stuff that we kind of notice, like moving around, staying warm if you're cold, shivering, that kind of thing. Anything you do, digesting your food, all of it is included in total energy expenditure. Now, more than half of that energy that you burn every day is spent on just the background basic stuff that your body does to keep you alive, stuff that you don't notice, stuff that you're doing while you're sleeping, for example. And we call that lowest level of just maintenance energy expenditure, we call that your basal metabolic rate. And it has different terms, and so people will see things like resting metabolic rate, basal energy expenditure. So it does get a little confusing. And there's sort of different flavors of criteria that people use to sort of make these sort of fine distinctions. But we don't need to worry about that for this discussion. We'll just call it all basal metabolic rate.
Yeah, how much it costs to run your body when you're not really doing much.
Exactly. And then, so that's something like 60% of your energy expenditure, even if you're an active person, even if you exercise most days.
Yeah.
Over half of your energy is still being spent on stuff that's not movement, that's not exercise. Another 10% or so of your energy expenditure is burned to digest your food, right? Because you've got to break down the bites of food you take have to get broken down into their constituent parts and absorbed, and then those nutrients have to get trafficked into your cells. All that takes energy. So about 10% of your daily calories burned goes to that. And then the rest is a little complicated. Well, we can call that we can call it activity energy expenditure. That's often what it's called. But it's important to recognize that leftover chunk, It's not basal metabolic rate. It's not digestion. A lot of it is movement, but it includes other stuff too. So right now, talking to you, for example, I'm not really moving,
Right.
but my body's on alert, right?
Yep.
My nervous system tone is a little bit higher than it would be if I was sleeping, surely.
Right.
And so my energy expenditure right now talking to you is higher than it would be if I was sleeping, higher than my
Right.
basal metabolic rate. And if I just do a simple subtraction exercise to get at activity energy expenditure, if I just take my total energy expenditure, I subtract basal metabolic rate, I subtract
hmm
digestion,
hmm
whatever I have left to call activity.
Yeah.
Well, what we're doing right now is going to get lumped into that activity
Right, right.
cost.
So activity includes overt movement, like if I go play basketball or
Yeah.
just walk around, but it also just includes being alert, aware, engaged.
Yep.
This is where, famously, chess players, when they're competing, they burn an incredible
Yeah.
amount of calories. So when you are
Yeah.
doing something in that sense, whether it's overtly physical or not, that's the active component.
Exactly. Exactly. And also I should say things like staying, if you're outdoors shivering, right? You're not
Yeah.
allowed to be shivering while we measure your basal metabolic rate. So something like shivering, it's never included in BMR. Yeah, if you're scared, the sort of fluctuation, that this kind of circadian rhythm in your organ activity isn't really captured in this because we always measure basal metabolic rate in the mornings when you're at your most quiet.
hmm
So, there's a lot that goes into activity energy expenditure that isn't just physically walking around playing basketball, that kind of thing.
Okay. So we've got basal metabolic rate, we've got active energy expenditure, which includes
Hmm.
overt movement and just other forms of engagement. And we've got total energy expenditure, which is everything.
Hmm.
When we think about total energy expenditure and its component pieces, now we can just simply ask the question, how do humans compare to primates like
Yeah.
gorillas and bonobos and things like that? Let's talk about that next. And maybe to do that, you should talk about how you guys actually measure these things in
Yeah.
species.
Yeah. So you would think you could just go and measure it, right? And until the 1980s, there actually wasn't a way to just go and measure it. To measure total energy expenditure, you need this technique called doubly labeled water, which is an isotope tracking technique. You drink some isotopically enriched water, and we measure those isotopes of hydrogen and oxygen as they flush out of your body over a week or 2 weeks. And from the rates at which you flush out the hydrogen versus the oxygen isotope, we can calculate how much carbon dioxide your body makes and therefore how many calories you burn. It's just a very precise, good way to do it. In fact, it's the only way to measure total daily energy expenditures outside of a laboratory setting.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was no way to do total energy expenditures, for apes for sure, and even really to do it well for humans until the 80s when this technique finally got good enough for
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like by allowing animals to drink this doubly labeled water, it's got a specific composition that has to do with
Yeah.
the isotopes that you can find in water. I don't think we need to dig into the hardcore details there, but
Yeah.
basically what you're saying is you can measure total energy expenditure, but still allow the organism to basically go about its day and not just be hooked up to a bunch of contraptions in a lab.
Precisely. You're not locked in a room. Don't have a mask on. It's just normal daily life. We just need to get a couple of urine samples over the course of sort of, a week or 2 weeks. Exactly.
Okay, so let's get into some of the top line results here. So when you do these types of experiments across primate species, what are the species you guys looked at, and what did you see? What was total energy
Yeah,
expenditure like in humans compared to other species?
right. So we looked at all of the great ape genuses. So we did orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, and bonobos. They're the same genus, but they're different species.
And these are all captive apes.
They're all captive. That's right. And so, these are all like good zoos or sanctuaries where they can move around as much as they want. They're not like, in a medical cage or something like that. They're
Mhm.
out free ranging, but they are in a zoo. That's right. So they're captive. We use this technique. Nobody had ever measured total energy expenditures in apes before, so this was a first for that. And yeah, so we had at the end of the day, it took years to do, and was with my good collaborators Steve Ross at Lincoln Park Zoo and Mary Brown, some others. We finally had total energy expenditures, calories burned per day for all of the great apes, plus of course humans. There's lots of human data out there that we were able to use.
So what did you see?
Yeah. So when you compare how many calories we burned for how big we are, right? Because you have to account for body size and all these
Mhm.
analyses.
Mhm.
You find that humans are burning 20% more energy every day. Our metabolic rates are just faster. We're churning through calories at about 20% more per day than chimpanzees and bonobos, which are the most closely related group to us. And then we're also burning even more energy compared to gorillas. Gorillas are a bit lower than chimps and bonobos. And then orangutans are their own really interesting story. Orangutans seem to be one of the lowest metabolic rates ever measured for any placental mammal. So marsupials are kind of strange. That's a fun conversation maybe for another day. But if you look at non-marsupial mammals, orangutans are the lowest ever measured, except for sloths and pandas. So really low metabolic rates in orangutans. But humans, the human story is we're the fastest metabolic rate. We're the high energy ape compared to all of our other ape relatives.
And you said, so we have high total energy expenditure compared to other primates, controlling for body size.
Yeah.
Maybe we should briefly mention when you just look across the animal kingdom, what's the general relationship between metabolic rate and body size, and why is that important to consider here?
Yeah. So, where does your metabolic rate come from? Why do you burn calories at all? Well, all of your cells are burning energy all the time just to do their daily functions. And so, the more cells the more energy you're going to burn. So, mice don't burn as many calories every day as an elephant does, right? Just because a mouse is tiny, doesn't have many cells compared to an elephant. Elephant's made up of many more cells and therefore just burns more calories, just by virtue of being bigger. And so it's an interesting sort of relationship, actually. It's not one-to-one. So you might think that, let's just use some toy numbers. If a 1 kilogram animal burns 100 calories a day, you might expect that a 10 kilogram animal would burn 1,000 calories a day, 10 times more. But that's not actually what you see. There's like an economy of scale. So the animal that's 10 times bigger will only burn like 7 times more energy, right? So somehow they're kind of saving energy there. There's like an economy of being bigger. And it follows a power law that's very well known since the 1930s, called Kleiber's law. So that the total energy you burn every day increases with metabolic rate to the 0.75 power. We can get into the math of that if we want to. But anyway, so we have to control for body size in any analysis we do, because bonobos and chimpanzees are much smaller than your typical human. Male gorillas are much bigger. Orangutans can be kind of around the same size or bigger or smaller. So you have to control for body size in any analysis of energy expenditure. And you have to do it in a smart way, because that power law kind of curve relationship.
It's not one-to-one.
Exactly.
Yeah. This is very consequential, right? Like if you were to just naively scale things one-to-one and say dose an animal with a drug and say, it's 10 times bigger, let's give it 10x the dose, that's going to become very consequential and even life-threatening.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, that's exactly right. So there's all sorts of reasons that we have to understand this relationship. It's also why, by the way, if you ever see somebody looking at the kilocalories per kilogram, right? You see people trying to kind of account for body size by just dividing your body mass by how many calories you're burning. If you ever see that simple ratio, that should be a red flag, because that ratio assumes a one-to-one relationship.
Right.
And when there isn't a one-to-one relationship, you can kind of get funny answers. So FYI.
Yeah.
Buyer beware.
Okay. So controlling for body size, humans have something like 20% higher total energy expenditure than we might expect otherwise compared to other apes.
Compared to other apes. That's right. So, so it was awesome because we finally had an explanation for how can we do all these expensive things?
More energy.
That's the how, right? That doesn't necessarily tell us the why. That's an interesting evolutionary story. But finally, we had an actual physiological explanation for how, because we didn't have that until this work came out.
And so let's dig into this a little bit more. One of the other things you look at is the relationship between free fat mass and total energy expenditure across ape species. What can you tell us there?
Yeah, so fat-free mass is kind of just what it sounds like. It's how much body mass you have minus your fat. And the reason we do that, we look at that measure, is that, like we said before, different organs, different tissues don't all burn the same number of calories per day. Fat is really quiet. It doesn't do much metabolic work. And so if we just look at your total body weight, that's not the best kind of measure of your metabolic size, if you want to think about it that way. Your best measure of size in these metabolic comparisons is fat-free mass.
And that would be really important if the proportion of body fat differed between species, I would imagine.
Yes, and it does, by the way. And so early work looking at just basal metabolic rate, that resting metabolic rate measure in humans and other apes, had found kind of misleadingly that there wasn't really a difference between humans and other apes. And that's because humans actually carry a lot of fat. We're not just the highest energy ape, we're also the fattest ape, which is kind of fun to think about. And so, a 50 kilogram human, 110 pounds, had the same basal metabolic rate as a 50 kilogram chimpanzee, more or less. And so people said, oh, well, look at that. It's, humans are no different than other apes metabolically. Not true, because humans carry a lot more fat. And so actually, if we had exactly the same metabolic profile, our tissues were all burning the same number of calories as each other. Humans should have a lower metabolic rate
Right.
at that 50 kilogram body size.
Right. How
The
much
fact
more
that, yeah.
fat do we have, and where is that fat mostly? Is there a pattern there?
Yeah. Well, so humans, a healthy human male adult might carry between 15 and 25% body fat, let's say. More is usually okay, a little bit more, too much more, and you have obesity issues. Less than 15 or certainly less than 10%, and you're a little bit too lean, typically, what people think. Um, Female humans, can carry a bit more fat, maybe 20 to 30% would be normal for a female human, maybe a bit over 30. Uh, for an ape, even in a zoo, a pretty sedentary ape, they carry 10% or less body fat.
Hmm.
They're actually really lean.
Wow.
You go to
So,
a zoo and see them sitting there, they have these big pot bellies, but that's because their digestive systems are so big. They're not
right.
actually fat.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
not visceral fat.
Yeah.
That's just a different gut.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. So
Exactly.
so a fat chimpanzee would be like 10% body fat.
Yeah, yeah, you would be, yeah. And they're really lean. Orangutans are interesting. They're a bit fatter than gorillas and chimps and bonobos, so they seem to be kind of more human-like in that regard. But
But
yeah,
still
humans
quite a
are
bit
unique.
less. I mean, I'm looking at the
Yeah,
chart. It's still quite a bit less than humans.
that's right. That's
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got higher fat mass. That fooled us for a while into thinking our metabolic rate didn't really stick out much. But it turns out
Yeah.
when you measure this with doubly labeled water, which allows you a precise measurement of total energy expenditure, humans have more total daily energy expenditure than other apes, controlling for body size. So basically, there's more energy for us to use to do stuff, and that
Yeah.
must be related to this apparent paradox where, how come there's no trade-off between, say, longevity and reproduction? Well, a lot of it could be due to the fact that we just have more energy at our disposal.
That's right. Yeah. And then, the next kind of question to ask from an evolutionary perspective is, well, why don't these other apes just ramp up their metabolic rates?
Right,
Right?
right.
If having more energy is so good, why doesn't everybody do it? And the answer is, well, it's also a cost, right? So you have all this energy available to do all this cool energy, evolutionary stuff, big brains, more babies, but you have to feed that machine every day,
Mm,
right? And so you need to have more energy available to you if you want to ramp your metabolic rate up like that evolutionarily. And so, just among humans and the other apes, there's two really fun stories there. There's the human story, which is how do we get extra energy? And the answer is hunting and gathering and sharing and the sort of mixed portfolio that we have. Some of us hunt, some of us gather. You have the benefits of being a carnivore and the benefits of being a plant eater combined. I mean, it's this really great strategy that is why we're such a successful species.
yeah. So there's
That
division
was
of labor there. You can get a higher diversity of foods in different contexts. I would imagine this could be where cooking comes in to some extent.
Yeah, cooking helps as well. It's going to increase how much energy per bite that you're able to get out of your food. But that's right. So, plant eaters, they're going after a low risk, low reward
Yeah.
food, right? If
And
you go out,
famously,
there's
right, like chimps and gorillas, I believe, they kind of just like eat all day, right? They have to constantly be ingesting and chewing that plant matter.
Yeah, especially gorillas. Gorillas go after really low quality.
Yeah.
That has a specific meaning in ecology. We just mean low energy leaves,
Hmm.
and not too much fruit, although they will eat fruit if they can. Chimps focus more on fruit, but still also eat leaves to kind of bulk out their diet.
Hmm.
But none of those have as much energy as meat.
Right. So
Uh,
just right out of the gate, there's just less energy to extract per unit time if you have that kind of ecological dietary focus.
exactly. Now, on the other hand, if you go after just meat, well, now that's really risky because even
Yeah.
the best hunters are going to come home empty-handed most days.
Hmm.
And so, carnivores are playing a different strategy, but they also you can't depend on those calories every day, right? And so, how do you maximize the benefits of both? Well, you have some of your group go and get plant foods, some of your group go and get these high energy animal foods, and you share it. And so, on days that the hunters come home empty-handed, that's okay. And on days that they come home with a kill, it's amazing. You have tons of calories and protein and fat. So,
Mhm.
so it's that really just launched this set of adaptations that we see in humans today.
Mhm. What about basal metabolic rate? How does that vary between humans and apes?
Yeah, so we also have a higher basal metabolic rate.
Okay.
And, again, that was confusing from data from kind of the 1960s, 70s, 80s, because when you just looked at body mass, we didn't look that different. And people hadn't sort of carefully and correctly accounted for body size differences. And so that's another thing we did in this paper in 2016 was to reassess the basal metabolic rate data. First of all, to look at it with this kind of power law curvilinear relationship in mind. Other papers earlier hadn't really done that. And secondly, to make the distinction between total body mass and fat-free mass. And when you take both of those issues into consideration, humans also have a higher basal metabolic rate, which you'd expect, right? It's not just it's kind of evident everywhere, this faster metabolic rate.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so higher basal metabolic rate for humans, higher total energy expenditure for humans. Another question that comes up here, especially, we'll talk about this more as we talk about,
Yeah.
hunter-gatherers and ancient or traditional populations versus present day populations. But what about just active energy expenditure, especially in the context of moving around? Were hunter gatherers moving around all day as much as other apes?
I mean, but I should point out that this human comparison to other apes, we used humans in Western industrialized contexts,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So, obviously, if you compare really physically active hunter-gatherers to apes in zoos, then the immediate response will be, well, that's not a fair comparison,
Got it. So
right?
you basically looked at both sedentary humans and sedentary apes.
Exactly, exactly. And if you look at like the number of steps that people are getting and the apes are getting, it's pretty comparable. So we wanted to make sure had an apples to apples comparison for that study.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so total energy expenditure is higher. That's just what you measured. So that's the observation.
Yeah.
How do we start to think about, we started to talk about this a little bit, but how do we start to think about how that's happening and why that's happening from an evolutionary perspective?
Yeah. So again, all of the human adaptations that kind of set us apart, our big brains,
Mhm.
our long lives, which you have to invest in your body to maintain it to live a long time. We have more babies more often. Everything that kind of makes us unique and different from other apes, it's energetically expensive. Um, and so that's where those calories are going. Um, and we're also more physically active during the day. Even a sedentary human, even me here with a desk job at Duke University. I mean, I like to exercise, but a lot of days I'm just kind of hanging around. But even so, if I get 5,000 or 10,000 steps, that's pretty good compared to like a chimpanzee in the wild. A chimpanzee in the wild, they don't, they go a couple kilometers a day, they climb
Mhm.
a bit.
Mhm. So it's not like
Um,
they're walking around foraging and climbing trees all day long.
no, they sit a lot, they rest a lot, digest a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you write in this paper as well, and we talked about it. So humans have more fat. We have this evolved predisposition to deposit fat, whereas other hominoids, other apes, are relatively lean, even in
Hmm.
captivity, as you pointed out, where activity levels are modest compared to in the wild. What are some of the implications there for obesity? Does this sort of hint that we are just sort of naturally predisposed to get fat, and that could there's basically just like something built in to the human that predisposes us to have high levels of adiposity.
Yeah, our normal level of body fat is just higher than other apes, and so we seem to want to build that. Um, you know, if you look across the mammal world, there's different kind of ranges for what a normal amount of body fat is, right? So, famously, Arctic species that have to live in the freezing cold have a lot of body fat to stay warm. Humans aren't like that. We're not saying that.
Mhm.
But we do have more body fat. Our normal amount of body fat is just more than most other primates and certainly more than our ape relatives. That's
Mhm.
right.
So that's the way things are as they've been measured today. You compare humans
Yeah.
to chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, orangutans that are around today. Now I want to talk about how we got there as a
Yeah.
species, how our lineage transformed over time, thinking about how diet changed on average, how metabolic adaptations, came into the picture over time. So when
Hmm.
we think about human diet and the origins of not just Homo sapiens, but say the entire genus Homo.
Yeah.
What would you point us to here to start thinking about this? What are the major themes and how diet metabolism started to shift around, say, the origin of our own genus compared to other
Yeah.
apes?
Yeah. So the big change that really launches our genus and this whole, human experiment, and it really makes us different than other apes, is hunting and gathering. And so around 2.5 million years ago, we start to see stone tools and other indicators of behaviors in fossil hominins. So hominins are our lineage. Um, we start to see indicators that those ancestors are not just gathering plant foods like other apes do, and not just, maybe hunting occasionally like a chimpanzee does, but are actually hunting enough, often enough that we see stone tools dedicated to that. We see cut marks on animal bones in these old 2.5 million year old archaeological sites.
Mm-hmm.
And along with that, we see these anatomical changes that we think are related to diet and metabolism. And so we see tooth size getting smaller, the cheek teeth, the molars that are doing the chewing
Mm-hmm.
get smaller presumably because the food that they're eating don't take as much chewing. They're not as fibrous and planty.
Yeah. So gorillas presumably have really big molars.
They have big molars and they're really sharp and they're kind of very clearly plant eating molars.
Mm-hmm.
We don't see that happening here. And I should say that before that, so the human lineage, hominins split from the chimps and bonobos about around 6 or 7 million years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And for the first 4 or 5 million years, we have lots of good fossils of our ancestors from that time. Species like Australopithecus afarensis, like Lucy, the Lucy skeleton, if you've heard of that.
Mm-hmm.
Those species are all clearly eating predominantly plants,
I see.
right?
So there was a shift towards more animal-based foods and less plant, but it wasn't really happening that much shortly after the time we split from chimpanzees.
Right. It didn't happen for 4 million years or so.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen until around 2.5 million years ago with the origin of our genus, the genus Homo. And in fact, that's why, that's why we see, I think, these anatomical changes that we call the genus Homo. Why do we call these fossils a different genus? Why do we call them our genus? Well, because these anatomical changes in brain size, which is getting a little bit bigger, tooth size, they're associated with stone tools, and we think of ourselves as the best tool makers, not the only tool makers, but the best tool makers. Those are the suite of changes that we say, okay, well, that's our genus now. And it's this break from earlier, more apey kind of ancestors.
Mm-hmm. And so so we started talking about it a little bit, but the balance of animal and plant foods is changing. The food acquisition strategy is changing. So hunting and gathering comes into the picture. Hunting is probably, really big there. Now we're getting more of those animal foods compared to plant foods, relatively speaking, compared to other apes. This is correlated in time with anatomic changes. It's correlated both with the brain getting bigger, these changes in tooth size, presumably other changes as well in terms of, like our limbs and our fingers and stuff that's tied into tool making, which sort of unlocks the ability to hunt and gather in new ways. Any other major changes that are worth calling out there, either in anatomy or in, I don't know what you'd call it, like implied metabolic changes?
Yeah, well, there's two that are important. One is not really an anatomical change, but we know it's happening, is sharing, right? And so hunting and gathering don't work without sharing, right? It's not the hunting or the gathering, it's the and. That's what makes hunting and the gathering so good.
Got it. Yeah.
And we see cut marks on bones of animals that are so big, there's no way that one hominin was eating that, right? They must have been being shared. And it's the sharing of the food that gives you this metabolic boost, right? Because again, if you're just a plant eater, you don't get the advantages of the meat. If you're just a meat eater, you don't get the advantages of the plant. You have to have both. So sharing is huge.
Yeah. So hunting and gathering, emphasis on the and.
Yeah.
There's a relative shift towards animal foods and away from purely plant-based diets that other apes have. But we're consuming both. The and is very important. What does that maybe imply about changes that must have happened in what we might just call metabolic flexibility, the ability to handle both types of food and not just focus, say, on only plants like gorillas? Yeah.
So our guts get a little smaller because we're not just eating this all pure fibrous diets anymore, fibery plant foods anymore. But yeah, we're able to handle a whole range of foods, and that is, you can see that in our teeth, you can see that in our guts.
Mhm. And when you say the gut got
Yeah.
smaller, do you mean like the length of the tract? What specifically does that mean?
Yeah, the tract gets a little bit smaller. Specifically, the large intestine gets a little bit smaller. That's we can see that today. By the way, we don't have fossilized intestines, right? But based on kind of the shape of the rib cage and what we reconstruct to be the shape of the belly and that kind of
Yeah,
stuff,
yeah.
it looks like that's all happening then. Not all at once right away, but it seems like it's happening that way.
Okay, so these,
Yeah,
these shifts happen over time. Many of them don't happen right away after the split from chimpanzees. It takes a few
right.
million years. The origin of Homo is defined based on a suite of anatomic changes we identify that are what we discussed: bigger brains, changes in molars, some other things, and that must have come with differences not only in the sort of food search and strategy and
Yeah,
social behavior stuff, but in metabolism as well.
yeah. Here's another fun one. This is related to metabolism. We start to see an external nose evolve
Hmm.
in early Homo. So you look at the face of a chimp or a gorilla. It's a very flat faced.
Yeah.
There's no nose, right? I'm a good example of this. But the bony part of the nose, it preserves in the skull, and so we can actually see that begin to develop in early Homo. What does it do? Well, we know from these same doubly labeled water measurements that we use to get energy expenditures also tell us how much water the body is going through every day.
Hmm.
And it turns out that humans are water conservers, right? We don't use as much water. We use about a third less than you'd expect for our body size compared to other apes. And so that's interesting. And that is telling us that there's sort of a different game going on. If you're eating just plant foods and you're hanging out in forests where it's warm and humid all the time, and you're not really physically active, then conserving water isn't a big deal. Most apes get all the water they need every day just from the plant foods they eat because plants have so much water in them, and they hang out in these like low activity, humid forests all the time.
Mhm.
Humans can't play that game. Our foods are drier, especially when we cook them, and we are more physically active in hot climates. And so we have to drink water, right? Humans are the only ape that needs to drink water every day, right?
Wow.
Yes, you can get by with a day or two, sure.
Yeah.
But a chimpanzee or a gorilla could go days, even weeks, and be fine
Hmm.
without ever drinking, open water.
Yeah.
They get
Yeah.
all the water they need from the plants they eat. And so an external nose, we think, is helping to conserve water because when you breathe out through your nose, the water vapor in your breath, right, the way you fog up a mirror, that water vapor in your breath has a chance to recollect against the
Huh.
internal surfaces of your nose. And so, we're still working on this question, but it seems like this is an adaptation for conserving water. And we see the results of that today when we look at how much water our bodies use compared to other apes. So the
Wow.
beginnings of that seem to happen with Homo as
Yeah.
well.
So our bodies want to hold on to water. We need to drink water every day. We also sweat a lot. So like there's something going
Yeah.
on where we're trying to recycle and recapture the water that we're
Yep.
losing all the time.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I should say, by the way, that there are some folks, this will get you into trouble. So this is a good thing to bring up. There's a group of folks out there who are sure that humans evolved kind of in rivers and other freshwater
I've heard
sources.
of this hypothesis. Yeah.
Yeah, this aquatic ape idea. And I don't think there's a lot of support for it in general in the field because there's not any great evidence for it. That's a pretty remarkable claim to make. So you need pretty remarkable evidence. And for me, the killer to that hypothesis is that we are conserving water, right? I mean, why would our bodies be built to conserve water if we were literally chest deep in fresh water or even, had access to water all the time?
Hmm.
And so I like it I
Yeah.
like that result for that fun reason.
Yeah. And so there's another observation I want to call out here and ask you about because this ties in some ideas I've always been intrigued
Yeah.
about in the realm of paleoanthropology. So the genus Homo originates. We start evolving as Homo, and we have the suite of adaptations that we just talked about. It definitely came with a relative increase in meat and animal food.
Yeah.
And there's some debates out there that people have had about, how much. Were we near carnivores? Were we omnivores that just ate more meat than other apes? And, exactly what did that look like? Another related question is, were we hunting and killing live animals, or were
Yeah.
we, say, stealing carcasses from other predators? And
Mm-hmm.
there's a really interesting observation I want to ask you about that might tie into that.
Yeah.
So if you compare stomach pH across different types of animals, humans, and then just omnivores as a category, carnivores, herbivores, and scavengers, what do things look like there? And what do you think that is maybe telling us?
Yeah, so we don't have any data for apes, which is what we'd really like, but
Mm,
humans have incredibly low, very acidic stomach acid. Our stomach environment's really acidic,
mm.
and it looks like we look like scavengers. We don't look like carnivores, by the way, and we don't look like herbivores for sure, which have much more
Yeah.
comparatively neutral stomachs.
Yeah. So herbivores have the highest pH, but then carnivores and omnivores, it's lower, but not nearly as low as scavengers and humans.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we look like vultures.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
scavengers, are they mostly eating dead and rancid meat, or are there also omnivorous scavengers?
Well, I mean,
Because
it kind of depends. A lot of animals, we use these classifications, and then you go out and watch the animal in the wild, and it'll, they'll do things you don't expect. And
right,
so I don't want
right.
to say never, but the reason that vultures have this suite of adaptations around scavenging is that's how they get most of their calories. That's a really
Yeah.
important part of their daily calorie intake. Even if they're not doing it all the time, they do it enough that selection, favored these
Yeah.
traits to make them good at it. And so I think you can say the same about us. Whether we were eating rotten meat all the time, presumably there was some selection that we're doing it enough that it really mattered.
Yeah. So for some period of time, that was probably happening to some degree, but it's really
Yeah.
hard to pin that down precisely, I imagine.
I suppose, but a great paper just came out looking at this in ethnographically, a series of papers by this guy, John Speth, and he's an anthropologist at Michigan. And he got very interested in this question about how much meat is being eaten in the Paleolithic, the Stone Age.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as a model for that, he looks at every account he can find of people eating meat as explorers are going around the world and writing down what they see, local groups doing, American Indians, South American groups, Africa, wherever they are. He gets all these accounts from the 1500s, 1600s, everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And across the board, these groups are all eating the most rancid,
Yeah.
putrid. Yeah, I mean, it turns your
I
stomach.
talked to Eugene Morin once on the podcast, and
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think he was talking about one of these accounts where early European explorers are interacting with Eskimos, and
Yes.
basically he tells the story of like this Eskimo that's camped out with these guys is so excited one morning he brings this rotting, just absolutely rancid seal carcass, and they're all horrified, and he's like, God, like this is gold. Like he was so
Yeah.
excited.
Yeah, yeah. They won't let him take it on the boat, and he gets so upset. I love that account. But and it's not just the Arctic. This is everywhere in the world that
So
people.
okay, so this was a very general thing, it seems to
Oh
be.
yeah, 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 yeah. So people eat rotten meat everywhere. So whether when that pH dropped in our stomachs, when that change happened, I don't know. But my guess is, I've had the chance to work with hunter-gatherer groups here, hunter-gatherer population in northern Tanzania, the Hadza. They're not really, known for eating rancid meat, but they absolutely do and will. Meat that I would consider not okay.
Wow. Wow. So the
Yeah,
interpretation here is that the low stomach pH is maybe making rancid meat more tolerable because it's like a filter for bacteria or something.
that's right. I mean, the question about why do we have stomach pH at all, low stomach pH at all? Part of it is it helps convert an enzyme that helps you digest protein. But if that were the case, then everybody who ate a lot of animal meat for protein would have carnivore-like pHs, but we don't. We have even lower. So why do you have such an even lower level of pH and an even more acidic stomach? I think the only obvious explanation is to kill
Yeah. Yeah.
bacteria.
So like
Yeah,
a predator, like a cat, they're eating fresh meat that they just killed. So they don't,
yes,
that's why the pH is higher for them. That's
that's
the
right.
interpretation you would have, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah, yep.
Interesting. Okay, so we made this relative transition towards animal foods to a fairly substantial degree, but humans were basically omnivorous to some extent everywhere you look for them. We do have a smaller gut compared to other primates. We've got this low
Hmm.
stomach pH. Hunting and gathering developed so we could sort of take
Yeah,
advantage of all possible available foods, more or less. And then we've got just higher total energy expenditure. So somehow all these things added up such that humans just have extra energy, so to speak, compared
yeah.
to other animals.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And that strategy wasn't available to other apes because they couldn't figure out hunting and gathering. I mean, not that they're actively trying, of course, but if we sort of think about it like evolution like a game, that strategy doesn't, they don't use that strategy, doesn't occur to them, whatever, not available to them. And so that's why we have this unique lineage.
And, I want to get back. So now I want to talk about um, not the deep evolutionary history of our genus, but after Homo sapiens is around, we become, and up to the present day, there's hunter gatherers and traditional populations living all over the world in very different food environments. They're all hunting and gathering to different degrees, and diet is different all over the world.
Yeah.
So, this starts to get us into questions around, because today, when you look at diet and people get so excited and so tribal, you've got carnivore people and vegan people, and then you've got, everything in between. And people are often talking about the human diet or what humans are supposed to eat. I want to talk a little bit now about how diet has varied around the world across what we'll just call traditional hunter-gatherer populations, leaving aside for a moment, like us, modern sedentary, technological, civilizational human beings. Can you talk a little bit about that? How, say, the mix of animal and plant foods has varied across traditional hunter-gatherer populations as a function of where they live?
Yeah, so we have ethnographic accounts, people finding these communities and taking notes on what they see that go back to the early explorer days, the early European explorer days, 1500s, 1600s, and then up to the sort of present day. And we've got these ethnographic accounts of, over 200 populations worldwide. Most of them are no longer really around anymore. They've been, they're not intact cultures anymore. But we've got 260 different communities or more that were hunting and gathering. Maybe some had a little bit of farming. Maybe some were doing a lot of fishing. There's variation there. But we have 260 data points now to see how diet changes across the globe. And what you see is there's an incredible mix of how much animal food and how much plant food these populations are getting across the globe. Like you expect, people in warmer climates are eating more plant foods because plants grow better in warm climates. And people who live closer to the poles in more Arctic environments are eating more animal foods because plants don't grow as well there, and there's more animal food available. If you live near a river and can get lots of fish all the time, guess what? Eat a lot of fish. If you start farming a little bit and have some staple crops there, you eat more plants because that's what you're farming. So it's a mix.
Yeah.
But even the pure hunter-gatherers, you see a whole range of foods eaten.
Right. Yeah, you've got this great graph in this paper I've referenced a lot, and it's basically percent of diet from animals across all these traditional populations as a function of latitude. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but when I look at this, basically, if you get close to the equator, people are eating 40, 60, 60, 40 mix of plants and animals. So it's, it's about 50-50 plus or minus some. And then as you move away from the equator, it becomes more animal centric. And you do have a variety of populations. I don't know what the proportion is here, but a solid chunk that are like, 80-20 or even close to almost all animal products. That would be like the Inuit or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. And so a couple of things to keep in mind there. One is because often that data point, those 80-20s or more of animal foods get used to say, oh, look, we're supposed to be carnivores. So let me stop you right there and just say, people haven't been in the Arctic full time until about 8,000 years ago. That's less ancient than farming.
Right.
So in terms of as a model of where we're from,
I see.
Unless you have recent Inuit ancestry, that is not where you're from.
Right.
So it's a strange model. It's actually a stranger model of the past in some ways than a farming population is.
So the Inuit are less old than farming.
Yes.
That probably ties into, so there is evidence of human carnivory in the last ice age, but that would again be a very, very recent and short sort of time window that was sampled from. I want to ask you about sort of on this topic. So farming's 10 or 12,000 years old. I want to give people a sense for the speed of evolution and metabolic adaptation. So I'll let you sort of direct where we go here, but let's just say you're talking about farming. To what extent can we be adapted to a grain-based farming diet? If we've only had that for 10 or 12,000 years, how much adaptation can you get in that time? Can you completely adapt to a diet in that amount of time, or does it take 100,000 years, say?
Well, you're assuming that we didn't have those same nutrients in our diet before.
Hmm.
Why would it take a long time why would you have to adapt to a grain-based diet? If you're eating starches in those foods, if that's what you're adapting to, well, there's starches in foods going back millions of years to when we're eating tubers,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? If you're trying to adapt to the specific nutrients, micronutrients in a grain, then sure, that could take longer.
Hmm.
But we see adaptations to specific nutrients happening pretty quickly if there's enough pressure. So, for example, the ability to digest milk as an adult, lactose
Yeah.
tolerance,
Yeah.
that seems to evolve pretty quickly after the development of dairy farming
Yeah.
happens independently, actually, in Northern Europe and then in Northern Africa.
And that's like what, a few thousand years of it
Yeah,
sweeps through the population.
yeah, that's right. Oh, and by the way, a nice UK biobank study recently, you don't have to have that genetic adaptation to eat and enjoy dairy. People who without those genes still enjoy dairy, and your body kind of figures out a way to digest it. So even if you didn't get,
A
let's instead
genetic
of
based adaptation, you could still say
right,
have maybe it's a microbiome based adaptation
it
or
could be
you're
that. Yeah,
pre-digesting
that's
it.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, your pancreas and especially, but the other parts of your digestive system make tons of enzymes whole, bunches of different classes and types of enzymes that are good at all sorts of nutrients, everything from protein to fat to carbs. Your body is built to break down a bunch of nutrients that you might find noxious, right? And so there's no evidence that there are these widespread inabilities to digest any of the nutrients that we find commonly
Hmm.
in the human
Hmm.
diet.
Yeah, it could just a lot of it could be context dependent, metabolic changes, gene expression changes. I would
Sure.
imagine like if someone's lactose intolerant today, they go and drink a cup of milk tomorrow, they feel terrible, so they stop drinking it. I think what you're
Yes.
getting at is if they were to
Yeah.
continue drinking it, their body might in fact adapt to it.
It might. And even if it doesn't happen for that person, and by the way, I'm not telling anybody to go drink milk if it makes you
Right,
uncomfortable.
right.
Don't do it. Fine. But that doesn't mean that your whole population
Right,
or
right,
that the human species
right.
shouldn't be drinking milk,
Yeah,
right? In the same way that, when I walk through a doorway, if I have to, I'm not particularly tall, but if I had to duck because it's a short doorway, then I need to duck. That doesn't mean
yeah.
that all humans need to duck or that doorway is a bad doorway for people, right?
Right, right,
Because
right,
my
right,
genes may be a little bit taller than average, right? So,
right,
I mean, like, it's a
right.
silly example, but just because a diet doesn't work for you, or maybe you can't eat gluten or whatever, yeah, those can be no question. People can have very real, you know, preferences and even tolerances of different diets. I'm not questioning that.
Yeah,
But to use those N of one stories to be
right,
like, well, that's why humans have to eat mammoth meat all the time.
right, right, right.
That gets a little silly.
And so, on sort of on a related note, humans spread all over the world. I mean,
Yeah.
clearly all these different food environments, a very different mix of different plants and animals, different parts of the world, and we're very adaptable and
Yeah.
changeable. Is metabolic flexibility like itself something that sticks out in humans? For example, I don't know how much you know about this subject, but like, do we flip and flop between ketosis and carb burning faster,
Oh.
more readily than other species?
Uh, so there's no evidence that I'm aware of ketosis being the standard normal state of affairs for any traditional population. We've measured it in the Hadza, we don't see it.
Mhm.
I don't know of any other group that I have any good diet data for today.
And so the Hadza famously they eat a lot of honey certain times of year, but I guess
Also
you might
tubers,
argue that
yeah.
maybe certain times of year they're fasting because food is less plentiful, or why
Yeah,
would
but
they be
you
thought to
you
be in
could
ketosis?
expect that, but we have data and they're not.
Yeah,
They're not.
yeah, okay, yeah,
Yeah. So, and we've measured, we've done sort of spot checks for ketones in diet, and we've
yeah.
never seen it. Um, and people will say, well, you missed it because you didn't do the right test. Yeah, I guess so, but we don't have
But I
any
guess
evidence for it,
I guess I don't understand why that would be some people's expectation. They're living close to the equator, food is available year round.
Yeah.
Why? Yeah.
That's right. So let's look at the Arctic populations. There's actually been evolution in some Arctic groups to prevent ketosis. So you have these really high protein, high meat, fat diet groups like the Inuit, I don't know exactly which Arctic population these are measured in, but those kinds of ecologies that they actually have a hard time going into ketosis.
What?
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Why? I mean, I don't understand that. Do we know anything about how that's working?
There's the evolutionary story there is not clear, sort of why that's the case. There's been an argument made. These are all hand wavy kind of speculative arguments about it having, you know, interactions in other aspects of physiology. I don't actually know. I don't think
Yeah.
anybody really knows.
But
We
it's
do
been
know that,
it's been measured, and they're not going into ketosis as quickly as other people do.
exactly. Yeah. Dogs, by the way, carnivores that eat only meat, they don't like going into ketosis either.
Hmm. Is it because they just have like is their high protein, high fat diet? Is there an adaptation there where they just have like stronger gluconeogenesis or something where they're
Yeah,
actually
that's
making
part of
carbs
it. That's going to
from?
be a part of it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, for dogs, I don't know about the human
yeah,
populations. I don't know
yeah.
there's evidence for better gluconeogenesis in those populations.
Hmm. But that could
We
okay, so that could be a potential explanation. We have seen something like that in other species.
sort of, I mean, it's speculative, but
Okay.
perhaps. We know that when we measure ketones in other apes, so for example, the classic work on this is in orangutans, that they go into ketosis when they're starving, right? So we talked about the metabolic adaptations in orangutans already a little bit. They have these kind of boom bust cycles of food availability. When there's no food in their forests that they live in Southeast Asia, they will go into ketosis.
Hmm.
And so going into ketosis is not unique to us. It's not something that we see paired with high meat diets
I see. Yeah. So okay,
necessarily.
that's the surprising thing.
Yeah, and we don't. So so can people go into ketosis by having a zero carb, very low carb diet? Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, because your body has nothing else to use for energy, but to say that metabolic flexibility is unique to humans is something surprising, is something about having a meat-based diet in the past. Uh, None of those explanations I don't see the data. I don't see the evidence for any of it. I'm open to it. I just don't see
Yeah.
the evidence for it.
I see. So basically, yeah, people have our okay. So there are basically carnivorous meat eating species, and they're not necessarily in ketosis all the time. So it's not like one
Exactly.
thing implies the other automatically.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
we don't have any evidence of, the other piece of this is people use hunting and gathering groups as models of health and what it should be like, what you should be eating.
Hmm.
And if that's your model, then you have to also accept that none of them are in ketosis.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right? So if somehow the healthy way of living that is the human natural way is this vision you have of modern, foragers and farmers, um, then you also have to accept that natural modern way of living doesn't involve ketosis, at least as the base state.
Yeah, yeah. So the other thing I'm just going to repeat because I didn't realize this. Even in populations that are eating a high, almost entirely animal-based diet, high protein, high fat, very low carb, at least most of the year, like the Inuit, they don't seem to be going into ketosis.
Or I don't know if they never do, but there are definitely adaptations in some of those groups at least. It hasn't, these are things that have been measured in a particular population, so I don't want to know. I can't say that it's
Yeah,
across the whole Arctic,
yeah, yeah.
but there are adaptations in at least some groups to not go into ketosis as readily.
Hmm. Interesting. So shifting focus now to present day humans and questions. So civilization develops, we have
Yeah,
technology. Now we're all sitting, in our offices doing Zoom calls
right,
all day.
right.
We've got this obesity epidemic. So we've set this up a little bit. Humans seem to be more predisposed to just storing fat compared to other apes.
Yeah,
That might have something to do with what we're going to talk about. Obviously, our lifestyles have changed drastically in the last couple of centuries.
yeah,
It's sort of what I'll just call the traditional naive model in a lot of people's heads, not necessarily people who study this,
yeah,
for why we have obesity is that, it's simple. Food is more readily available and we're eating more of it and we're also moving less.
yeah.
So to solve obesity, you just have to get people to eat less and move more. So with that in mind, like, first of all, can you just kind of
Yeah.
critique that model and what's been known about to what extent that's true or not true up until recently?
Yeah. So, the standard like WHO, World Health Organization, CDC, whatever your public health guidelines you want to reference, they all say the same thing, which is that obesity is this 50-50 kind of problem. It's diet and activity in equal measure. It's usually how it's framed. We actually know for decades that exercise is really important for your health. If you're not moving, you're not active, that's not good for you. But we also know that it doesn't correlate to, to body weight control in a easy way. So if you are more physically active, you're exercising more, It isn't necessarily going to keep you from becoming obese. We know that exercise by itself is a pretty poor tool for trying to reverse obesity. It doesn't work for most
So
people.
if you're obese or you're putting on weight and you want to go in the opposite direction, if all you do is exercise 20% more, there's actually not a lot of good evidence that you're going to lose 20% of your weight or very much at all, maybe.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yep.
Okay, so unpack this a little bit more for us. So what have we known about, what moves body fat in
Yeah.
humans?
Well, diet's the main thing. There's been some muddying of the waters over the last couple of decades for various reasons. The idea that, somehow calories aren't calories or humans don't follow the laws of physics or something like this. You see variations of this idea. But it really is the case that all of the calories that are your body weight and, your fat, all the calories stored as tissue are calories that you ate and didn't burn off. That has to be true. And, and so your body weight really is a balance between how many calories you eat every day and how many calories you burn off. And the fact that we can't really move the needle on, with how many calories you're burning very well. We can talk about that, get into that detail.
Hmm.
But it seems like the energy that you're eating, the dietary energy, is really what's pushing obesity. And so we have, lots of evidence for that for decades, that diets work if you stick to them, exercise doesn't.
Hmm. So people are eating more today, no question about it. Caloric intake has gone up, but what we eat also changes. We'll probably come to that. Let's dig into what you said around movement and exercise there, because this will probably surprise quite a number of people that hear this.
Yeah.
What were you getting at just a moment ago when you said that exercise on its own, even if you stick to it, isn't often going to be sufficient to do what people want it to do?
Yeah. So, well, I'll start off with how I got into this issue, which is we wanted to understand how many calories you burn every day if you're a hunter-gatherer. Why do we want to know that? Well, because we know that metabolism is so important for so many aspects of evolution and ecology. It's like a central thing you want to know about any species. And we didn't really have a good idea of what it is in our own species.
And I suppose the naive view here going into some of the stuff is, oh, well, people move less today. We're sedentary. We've got couches and nice apartments. Hunter-gatherers must have been moving a lot more. And so, but what does it actually look like when you go in?
What
and
does the
measure all
gap look
this?
like? So we wrote this. I mean, the grant is, someday I'm going to post the grant online because it's hilarious in a way. We wrote what we expected to see. We wrote to the National Science Foundation and we applied for this grant to measure how many calories you burn every day as a Hadza hunter-gatherer, right? Because we knew going into it, and it's absolutely true, that they're much more physically active than the standard American adult is, or European, or anybody else in the developed world. And we used this doubly labeled water technique. So we had a really precise measurement of how many calories burned per day. Nobody had ever done it with a hunter-gatherer group before.
Got it. So same technique you used before with the apes and zoos, but now you're doing it with the Hadza in Africa.
Exactly.
And they can go out and do their Hadza daily routine the normal
exactly
way.
it. Yep. Every couple of days we get a urine sample takes 5 minutes to do that. Otherwise, totally normal daily life for these guys. And by the way, we're tracking their activity as well with accelerometries and that kind of stuff. So we know. We know how active they are, and they are just as active during this period that we're measuring them for calories as they are normally. Yeah. We get the results back, and we were shocked because they actually don't burn as many calories as we thought they would. In fact, they burn the same number of calories as Americans do and Europeans do. And in fact, by the way, if you don't account for body size, they burn less than Americans do. Why? Because they tend to be a bit shorter, a bit smaller bodied.
I see.
So, so people say, well, did you account for body size? And we say, I always laugh a little bit because I'm like, well, yeah, if we don't account for body size, it's even crazier.
Right.
But if you account for body size, they're burning the same number of calories as we'd expect for an adult in the US. That was mind blowing because they're much more active. They get more physical activity in a day than most Americans get in a week. So we didn't expect that at all. And that was the beginning for me. Other people had sort of seen pieces of this, but for me, that was the beginning of the aha. Our bodies somehow adjust to our lifestyles.
Right.
And even when we're physically active, we're not burning as many calories as you'd expect for that increased activity. Maybe there's something going on there. And so that became, the last 10 or 15 years of my work is trying to And
Yeah.
part of it has been trying to understand that.
Yeah. And so I mean, let's unpack that for people. So some populations are way more active. The Hadza are, in fact, as
Yeah.
you would expect, more active than sedentary, Western Europeans or Americans today, and yet they're not burning as many more calories as you'd expect for that difference in active activity.
Yeah.
So, what's making up for the difference here? Is it an adaptation in the basal metabolic rate? What's going on?
We've been trying to figure this out for a long time. And it's challenging because um, measuring these kind of trade-offs is hard to do inherently. We think that some aspects of resting metabolic rate are being reduced. So if we look at the best data we have comparing active and inactive people with the best quality data isn't necessarily the Hadza versus everybody else, because when we go to the Hadza, we do that work in the field. We're limited in the tools that we can bring with us in the back of
Mm-hmm.
a Land Rover into the middle of savannah.
Mm-hmm.
So the best data often comes from comparisons of physically active people who exercise a lot and people who are more sedentary. When you look at those comparisons, we see, in some cases, we see lower basal metabolic rates, although we don't always see that, but sometimes
Mm-hmm.
we see lower basal metabolic rates. So that's a clue.
In
We
active,
see
more active people.
inactive people.
Yeah.
Yep. We see lower levels of immune function. So we see like inflammation that gets tamped down.
Mm-hmm.
We see stress reactivity, the kind of alertness
Mm-hmm.
and that
Mm-hmm.
you get when you are stressed. Even good stress
Yes,
goes
but
down.
what's important there, I think, when you said a lower immune function, the immune system is very expensive metabolically, so
Yeah.
that's a place where we could be making up for that difference.
Thank you. That's
Okay.
exactly right. So, and what the biggest things we see are changes in background inflammation, which you kind of don't,
Mm.
that's usually a bad thing to have chronically high,
Right, right, right.
inflammation levels. So that gets tamped down when you exercise. Stress reactivity, the cortisol and epinephrine response that you get to stress goes down when you exercise. Well, those are
Mhm.
also expensive, metabolically expensive responses. You get less of that.
Yeah.
Um, by the way, we know that people who produce more cortisol and epinephrine per day burn more energy per day than people who don't
Hmm.
for basal metabolic rates. So, so that is really one place that we could absolutely be saving energy that way. Um, the reproductive hormones are also lower in people who exercise more. That's a surprise to some people because they think, that there's a certain corner of the internet that's sure that if you go out and lift weights, you're going to increase your testosterone levels. That can happen in the short term as you anabolically build muscle. But actually, if people exercise a lot, um, testosterone levels, estrogen levels tend to go down, not up, because your body's kind of adjusting to that limited energy availability and tamping those processes down. So all of that is healthy, by the way. Reduce stress, reduce,
Hmm. Hmm.
it's all good until you go to the extreme. If you are like Olympic level, distance
Yeah.
runner, then your exercise workload might be so big that you actually tamp those processes down too
Right,
far
right.
and you get overtraining syndrome.
Yep. And that's where people have like hormone problems and other things that start to
Yep,
go awry.
exactly, exactly. So in my mind, I think before this perspective on metabolism kind of became more common, I think those responses in overtraining syndrome were seen as like a pathology that's like a binary, you're fine and then you're not.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would say, well, it is true that that's not a healthy way to live, but it's just the end of a spectrum
Hmm.
of how you spend your calories.
I see. So if I try and abstract some, a theme from this that I'm hearing, tell
Yeah,
me what you think about this. It kind of sounds like if you exercise, the more you exercise up to a point, if you're doing a healthy amount
yeah,
of exercise, it is decreasing the extent to which your body is doing metabolically expensive things at baseline, like chronic inflammation related to immune system activity, and therefore because you're not putting as much energy into those energy sinks, you have more energy left over that can be used for more useful things. And that might play into why you've got a lower body fat percentage, say.
yeah. I mean, it wouldn't necessarily decrease your body fat percentage because if the total calories burned per day don't change, then you're not going to burn excess body fat off. And in fact, when we look at people who are more active and less active, we don't see a body fat relationship there, not strongly.
Hmm.
Um, if you are more active today and you maintain that for the next few years, you're no more or less likely to gain body fat as anybody
Hmm.
else,
Hmm.
for example.
I see. So the energy that you're not putting into things like, the immune system stuff and, other stress responses and things like that, it's not necessarily just going to burn fat off, but it's going to be left over to do something else.
Well, part of it's the exercise, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like if I burn my calories in my muscles because I exercise,
Yeah.
then I have less energy to burn in my immune system and everything else,
Right. Right.
right? So if I burn more with my muscles, then, I'll just burn less with other stuff. And the total calories a day, I'm not going to say it won't change at all. If you start exercising today, you get an exercise program and you start going. Um, but it won't change as much as you think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it might not change at all. We do see that where people,
Mm-hmm.
they start an exercise program today, and we look at them 12 months later, they're doing the exercise faithfully.
Mm-hmm.
Their total energy expenditure is the same as it was when they started.
Mm-hmm. So
before they started, actually.
Yeah. So essentially what you're saying is the obesity epidemic can't be solved by merely having people exercise more. That's probably going to be a losing strategy in general. That doesn't mean that exercise is bad or not good, but it means it's not going to be effective for this particular outcome. Thinking about obesity more, thinking on the diet side now, let's decompose the total amount of calories and the specific type of calories someone ingests. To what extent, how do you think about both of these levers here, the total caloric intake versus the specific type of calories and how much that matters in terms of fat mass gain or loss?
Can I excuse myself for 1 minute? I have somebody making noise outside my house. I don't know what it's all about. I'll be right back.
I'll keep people occupied here. So Herman's going to come back in just a minute. Now we're going to talk about, more specifically how diet impacts adiposity and obesity. To what extent is it about caloric intake overall? To what extent is it about the type of calories that you are consuming, and not just how many you're consuming? People argue about this all the time. My general perspective is both matter. The total caloric intake matters, and the specific type of calories that you ingest matter. It's not like it's one or the other. We'll see how much time we have to dig into this. We've got about maybe 30, 40 minutes left here. And then we'll talk about a new paper somewhere in here that Herman, which is an author on, that looked at total energy expenditure measurements across present day humans in lots of different parts of the world, well-developed parts, hunter-gatherer populations, pastoralists, and so forth. And so we'll get a sense for how energy expenditure, total energy expenditure, and basal energy expenditure actually vary among present-day human populations. And so we'll try and unpack as much of this as we have time to cover. And we'll talk a little bit about maybe ultra-processed foods and what exactly that is supposed to mean. But for now, we're just waiting for Herman to come back. The reason I'm on a monologue right now is because it takes too much time and effort to go in and cut and paste and rejigger things within an episode. So that's a huge time sink from a production standpoint. That's why that's a reason why long form podcasts, I think, have proliferated. You get a lot of content in here. You can automatically chop it up with AI into more bite-sized chunks, and it's just too much of a time sink to go back in and micro edit every little bit that's going on. So I feel it's like that scene in Jurassic Park where where Jeff Goldblum's character is in the car by himself, and he's like, well, now I'm in the car by myself talking to myself. I just watched Jurassic Park again the other night with family. So anyways, some surprising things that I heard in that talk is what he said around ketosis and different human populations. I would have assumed, as I think many people naturally would, that a population like the Inuit would readily or go into ketosis and or more or less always be in ketosis. But it sounds like that's not quite the case. They're not as readily going into ketosis. And other species that eat more carnivorous diets aren't necessarily in ketosis all the time as well. I don't know a lot of specifics there, but I do think there are some adaptations in other species that speak to that, their ability to generate sugars from non-carbohydrate sources. All right, Herman's back now.
Sorry about that. All good.
No worries. Okay, so basically, we're talking about the diet side here, and I want to get your take on how you think about caloric intake itself versus the specific types of calories people consume, and how each of those is contributing to fat gain and fat loss.
Yeah. So I don't think it has makes a big difference if the calories, in terms of pure body weight, if the calories you're eating are coming from fats or carbs or proteins. I mean, especially the difference between fats and carbs, I think, is pretty minimal. Now, that doesn't mean that all foods are equally likely to drive you to overeat. That's not the point. But in terms of what a fat calorie is going to do versus a carbohydrate calorie, once it's in your bloodstream floating around, it's just as likely to get burned or stored. Um, and you know, I think in terms of the macronutrient content of the food, and just the general makeup of the food overall, the bigger issues there are, things like how much fiber, how much protein content to other calories, because I think that helps you. I think it affects satiety. So basically, the things that help affect whether you feel full or not, or more likely to keep eating, um, are some of them are related to the nutrients in the food, but a lot of them are, the flavorings, that kind of thing.
Yeah, what we would call palatability.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to what extent is the food palatable, which more or less means how much do you enjoy the sensory experience of eating it, and is that enough enjoyment to override your feelings of fullness?
Right. Let's put it this way: if you overeat, sorry, let's say you eat 100 calories of broccoli, right? Um, you're probably going to feel pretty done at that point. That's a lot of broccoli. If you eat 100 calories of potato chips, you might very well feel like eating more potato chips. Now, in terms of its effect on your body weight, that 100 calories is going to have the same effect. If you stopped both of them, then you'll have eaten 100 calories, and you'll have had that much more on board. The difference in the foods in terms of your weight is that you're more likely to keep eating after 100 calories of potato chips rather than after the 100 calories of broccoli.
Mm-hmm. And how much, like, do we have a sense for how much of that is the liking of the taste versus
Mm.
the physical way that processed foods are engineered and how they affect, say, like satiety hormones and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a good Kevin Hall question. This is an NIH researcher who just recently left NIH, but this is one of his big areas of research is ultra processed foods and why they push us to overeat too much. And I don't think we know. So, my sense, my intuition, if I were to place a bet, the hyperpalatability, that they just taste so good, they're actually built to be a little bit addictive. Or even a lot addictive. I don't know. That I think that's the main thing. I don't think it's the insulin response. I don't think it's uh, any other aspects of it. I think it really is in the brain, the way that these foods are affecting your brain.
Mhm. So the perception, how much you like, the valence of the experience is more
Yeah,
positive. The idea would be that you're therefore more strongly motivated to eat more despite your satiety signals. And then I suppose there could be something going on where the satiety signals themselves get disrupted by something in some of these foods.
sure.
But it sounds like we don't have all that nailed down.
No, I don't think we know all of it for sure yet. And what I hope as we kind of launch into this new era, of make America healthy again and this focus on diet, I think most of the folks in my world are in agreement that that needs to be a focus of what we do next in terms of the research into nutrition and health and obesity. Um, whether or not that work is going to get done in a useful way, I think remains to be seen. I'm hopeful.
Mhm.
But I think, if somebody has in their mind that they already know what the answer is, it's food dyes or it's corn syrup or it's whatever, that's not a useful way to do the science. I think we have to keep an open mind and really do the work and ask, do the work carefully to figure out what it is that's making these foods push us to overeat.
Mhm. And, a lot of people are talking about ultra processed foods versus whole foods.
Yeah.
I want to get like, how do we actually define these things? It's
Hmm.
almost, it's like one of those things where it's like I know it when I see it, right? We all have an
Yeah.
intuitive sense of a whole food versus a processed food, but when we
Yeah.
really get specific about this, how do you define ultra processed foods? Is there a clear definition? Is there a nice sliding scale rubric we can
Yeah.
use to measure
I
this?
mean, so there are. there are definitions out there that people use in these nutrition studies. It has to do with the number of ingredients and the way they're combined. I don't think I don't think I'd get it quite right if I were to try to
Mhm.
recapitulate that definition. But yeah, it's the number of ingredients, the way they're combined, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So intuitively, like the more processing steps
Yeah,
involved to go from the starting material to your plate, the more processed
yeah.
it is.
Right. I mean, if you pick it up out of the vegetable aisle or the butcher's counter, or for that matter, making bread at home, that kind of thing, those are probably not going to reach the level of being called an ultra processed food. If it comes in its own colorful package and the ingredient list is a paragraph,
Yeah.
then yeah, pretty good chance you've got an ultra processed food.
Mhm. And do you have any thoughts around? So when we think about ultra processed foods, there's the amount of stuff we put in there that's how do I say it? That's supposed to be in there, the calories, the vitamins and minerals and stuff like
Yeah,
that. There's also the stuff that can be lost along the way, things that you might
yeah,
want in there get lost. And there's also the possibility that uh, other stuff gets put in, endocrine disruptors,
sure.
chemicals, things like
Yeah.
this that don't actually have caloric or nutritional value. How do you think about all those things?
I mean, I don't know that I have any original thoughts on that. Those are all potential contributors to why these foods push us to overeat. Any of them could be important. I yeah, I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows. So, what can we say?
All right. Well, let's talk about the new PNAS paper about energy expenditure across present day populations of people.
Yeah.
So, we talked a little bit about energy expenditure across species and between more traditional or past populations and today, and some of the life history and evolution stuff. But you guys went out and you did these doubly labeled water experiments to measure
Hmm.
energy expenditure in a bunch of different present day human populations, ranging from hunter gatherers to people in Western Europe and the U.S. and
Yep.
a variety of others. So set this up for us. What was the basic setup here, and what were the sample populations you looked at specifically?
Yeah. So this doubly labeled water technique has only been around for a few decades. That's not very long in the world of science, and it's expensive. And so, to date, it's still, and I think it's still true, the studies that we do with this technique are usually smallish, fewer than 100 people. And, they are driven by different questions. And so there hasn't been the funding or the time or the ability to do these sort of broad geographic global kind of questions in energy expenditure before. But now, because the labs, including mine, but a few others that do this kind of work, have decided to work together. It's a really great story about international collaboration to do science. We've all pitched our data together. We built this big database called the Doubly Labeled Water Database. It's hosted by the International Atomic Energy Agency, part of the UN. And it's available for researchers to use, and it has over 10,000 measurements now of people daily energy expenditures in people across the world in different populations. And so the studies that go into that are from a whole range of sources, from the kind of human ecology, anthropological kind of research that I do, to studies of, different populations within the US for, a whole variety of reasons that people might do these studies. But the end result is that we have pretty representative samples of of populations from, like you say, from hunter-gatherers to pastoralists who live with their herds to farmers to people in poor countries where they're doing a lot of manual labor and farming to people in rich countries with desk jobs. It's the full economic spectrum. And so we wanted to ask the question, how does energy expenditure change or vary across that spectrum of lifestyle?
Yeah, and then this relates to questions around, okay, how much are people eating more or less based on economic development? How much is their energy expenditure varying? Let's just start out with the basic and unsurprising things. So, how does body mass and BMI relate to economic development?
Right. So the richer your country, the more developed the country you're in, on average, the taller and heavier you are, and the more body fat you carry.
Mhm, mhm. So basically, higher BMI in more economically developed areas. That's unsurprising. One thing that I wanted to ask you about is I'm looking at the graph right here. So yes, on average, BMI is higher the more developed
Mhm.
the places that you're making these measurements. What also seems to be highly variable is the level of variance in BMI and body weight.
Yeah.
It looks like the more developed you are, the variance is much higher than in other populations. Is there anything worth noting
That,
there?
yeah, I mean, I think what you're seeing is that you just don't see obesity, right? So the upper end of that tail, the upper
Yeah.
tail of the distribution just isn't there in a lot of poorer, less developed countries. And as we all know, it certainly is there in the US. At the same time, you still have people like you and me who are not, you know, on that obese tail. So, you don't lose everybody who is at what we would consider to be the sort of the normal BMI range, but you gain folks who are above that in the developed countries.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what about energy expenditure across these different populations? What did you find there?
Yeah, well, it also increases. So you burn more calories every day on average in more developed countries
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because you're bigger. So that's not a surprise. But I
Okay.
think it bears saying because you do see people just saying, oh, we burn fewer calories
Right. That's
in the
the
West. And that's really not true.
right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's
Now,
largely just because we're bigger. Like those
exactly.
two things are just tied together.
Exactly. And, we actually, as we're writing this paper, we kind of went back and forth about how we frame that. Is that like such an obvious thing that we just put it in the supplemental materials and like we talk about it, but we don't focus on it? And I've had enough of these conversations over the years doing this work that I thought, no, we're gonna make sure that this is very clear. And it's a point in the paper that you actually burn more calories, not less, when you're in a developed country. And, even though you're more sedentary, all those things, you're actually burning more calories. Yes, by virtue of being bigger. But I think it bears saying clearly that you're actually burning more calories, not fewer, when you are in a more developed country.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so what about other aspects of energy expenditure like basal
Sure.
metabolic rate?
Sure. When you correct for so basal metabolic rate is also higher
Okay.
in a developed country, again, because of the body size thing. When we account for body size, we do that sort of adjustment of our data to account for the body size effect. We see two things. There is a sort of tiny whisper of a effective development. So um, it's a small, but when we have thousands of people in this study, over 6,000 people in this study, I think, or maybe sorry, in this analysis of just adults, I think it's over 4,000 people we have. With that many people, you can detect a very small effect of development on basal metabolic rate. So people in less developed countries, probably because they have more like pathogens, more germs that they're fighting every day. They have higher basal metabolic rates,
Mm-hmm.
and that goes down as you get more developed. As a result of that, total energy expenditure also tips that way. So in less developed countries, slightly more energy expenditure. Again, it's attributable to basal metabolic rate, not attributable to activity or anything like
Yeah.
else. And it's a really small effect. But the bigger pattern, I think, is that the variability within a population is much bigger than the differences between populations. And there's no clear evidence of lifestyle effects on any of this stuff. So again, we see again in this analysis, Hadza hunter-gatherers look exactly like US men and women. And lots of cases like that where, there's just no clear effect of lifestyle on energy expenditure, period. If you want to look at the tiny effects, they seem to be on basal metabolic rate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so again, we come back to this idea that a huge component of basal metabolic rate seems to be energy intensive. I don't know if I want to call it a background process, but certainly nothing that we're consciously controlling, like your immune system overall activity, which is
Yeah,
naturally going to tie into, say, the pathogen load in the environment you're in.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So there's not a big effect. It's kind of a Hadza result all over again. We don't see an effect of economic development, really. If you look really carefully with a huge sample size, you can find a small effect, and it's on basal metabolic rate, not on other aspects. And that kind of
Mm-hmm.
bubbles into total expenditure, but again, it's pretty a small effect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So again, bigger people have higher total energy expenditure,
Exactly.
which if you think about it, makes sense. But to a lot of people, that will be the opposite of their expectation.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Um, and so we can then ask the question, well, okay, who cares? Who cares why there's this sort of small effect of economic development on energy expenditure? Maybe that's enough to to explain this pattern of body fat that we see across
Mm-hmm.
populations. So maybe even though there's just a tiny little effect of economic development on energy expenditure, maybe that's enough to
Yeah,
explain
because people they
body
don't
fat
wake up
percentages.
obese. It
Right.
unfolds day after day, year after year.
Exactly. And so we asked that question last. There's sort of three questions in that paper. The third question is, if we look at the variation in energy expenditure, size adjusted again, and ask if that explains body fat percentages or BMIs, it really doesn't. Again, with 4,000 or some people, you can detect a tiny effect, but it's really variable across populations. Most populations, there's no effect really at all. Some are more, some are less. And the bottom line is, at most, the variation in energy expenditure around the globe explains maybe a tenth of the obesity differences across the globe.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest of it, again, because it has to be expenditure or intake, the rest of it must be intake and diet.
Hmm. And so what was the relationship you found between body fat percentage and ultra processed food intake, and how did you actually count and measure ultra processed food intake?
Yeah. So we were left with this analysis that says, look, the energy expenditure is not explaining body fat percentage. It must be energy intake, but that's not super satisfying because we don't actually measure the diet in this study. You don't have those data.
Okay.
But if that's true, then let's find ways to test that what we're left with holds water, that there really is something there. And so what we did was we went into the literature, into the scientific literature, and we found good data for every group that we could. It wasn't all of them, but it was a lot of them. Every community that we could, the amount of ultra-processed food they're eating, for example, and asked, does that explain body fat percentage differences? And sure enough, it does. So the most obese populations, the highest body fat populations, are eating the most ultra-processed food.
And that's just based on the availability of those foods at like the population level.
So those are analyses that looked at the percentage of calories in the diet that are, so presumably these are the calories being eaten. Although I don't think anybody's going home and making sure that you finish your Doritos.
Right,
So
right. But it's like it's a food availability measure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And what percentage of the calories that you're available to you in your community are from ultra processed foods.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So we've got a little bit of time left. So what would you say, like, what is like your based on everything you've studied, you've got this really interesting picture with your anthropology background of having looked at all of these present day and ancient human populations. You've thought about this, over time and across space. What would be like sort of the bullet point things you would say to a present day person who wants to lose weight or is suffering from obesity in terms of what's going to give them the biggest bang for their buck in terms of relatively simple and manageable lifestyle changes?
Sure. First of all, don't stop exercising. It's really important for a lot of aspects of health. But when you want to move the number on the bathroom scale, it's got to be diet. You have to focus on diet. Now, the good news is that, this kind of tribalized view of diets, it has to be this or it has to be that, is not true. I don't think. I don't see any evidence for that. Any range of diets might work for any individual person. So people should kind of shop around and try. I mean, we do know that eating higher fiber foods make you feel full on fewer calories. Higher protein foods can make you feel full on fewer calories. And that's the name of the game. If you need to lose weight, how do you eat fewer calories without being miserable? Because if you're miserable, you're not going to stick with it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, with that in mind, what are your thoughts on fasting, like intermittent fasting and time restricted feeding?
I
don't
think there's any.
To what extent are those useful and manageable?
Yeah, I don't think there's any magic there. I think the reason those work is they cut how many calories you eat every day. And for some people, it's a really good strategy that they find easier to follow than trying to sort of cut 10% out of every plate of food or something like that. And so, the benefits are there. If you can reduce how many calories you're eating every day, you're going to see the same benefits, whether that's because you went with time restricted feeding or with a no carb diet. Sometimes it works great for people. No problem for me with that, if that's what works for you. Mediterranean diets work. It depends on what kinds of foods and what pattern of eating is going to keep you the healthiest. I know that for me, one thing that I pay attention to, if I, trying to watch calories for some reason, is how much do I eat while I'm watching TV at night, right? I come home at the end of the day, I got 2 kids. I'm dealing with them. They've got a lot going on, which is wonderful and fun. But by the time they're in bed, I'm exhausted and I just want to zone out for a while.
Right.
And in my zone out time, if it's TV or whatever it is, often, that comes with a snack. And it doesn't have to, but it will if I, that's one great easy way for me, to watch how many calories I'm eating is am I snacking or not? So anyway, there's different ways to do it. And I think if you are trying all those things, if you've tried all those approaches, all those lifestyle interventions, and you're still struggling, then, honestly, I'm a big proponent of the new class of weight loss drugs, GLP-1 and GIP drugs. I have no investments in any of them. I'm not making any money off of them, I can promise you. But to me, as far as I read the data, they seem really promising. They work for a lot of people, and they work by keeping your brain quiet and not, pushing you to overeat. So I think, I don't think those should be the first line of approach. I think lifestyle is always the better way to start. But I think those drugs have been a real game changer.
You look like you might be like me in that you're a naturally lean person. I don't seem to be particularly prone to putting on a lot of body fat. Are there people that are just naturally more resistant to developing obesity? And do we
Yeah.
understand why?
Yeah, absolutely. We know from looking at the genetics of obesity that there's you come into the world kind of wired in a way that makes you less or more likely to struggle with that. It has all the evidence points to the brain and how the brain is wired as being, the organ where this is happening. And I can say that anecdotally this bears out for me. I haven't ever struggled with weight. I've been very lucky that way. But part of it is that I just don't care that much about food. Not as much as I know, my wife is also lean and in a healthy weight, all that kind of stuff. But I know that she just thinks about food more than I do. What's the snack she's going to have? What were you having for dinner? Those are on her mind in ways that aren't on my mind.
Mhm.
And I think that that's, kind of it gets anecdotal, but I think it's that kind of microcosm of what's going on larger, in a larger picture.
But it sounds like what you said a moment ago is so there's been, you know, genetic studies where we look at, okay, some people seem to be more naturally lean or more prone to obesity. There are genes that correlate with that. If I was picking up what you were putting down there, a lot of those genes are genes that express highly in the brain.
Yes, exactly. That's right. That's right.
And are there any important call outs there? Are there any clear patterns as to what circuits are involved or what exactly those, proteins and things are doing?
I think for that set of questions, the better evidence is from, the work done on like the hypothalamic signaling in mice, and some of it's done in humans about brain signaling and parts of the brain where you're active when you're eating and hungry. So I don't think the genetic work, I might be wrong about this, but I don't think it's quite connected to brain regions and pathways exactly yet. But there's other work there that says, and including actually the success of the GLP-1 and GIP drugs also point to this, that it's hunger and satiety signaling and reward centers within the brain that are kind of where the crossroads for all of this.
Yeah.
It's never going to be one simple thing, right? It's all a bunch of different factors. Yeah.
And I imagine those things are tied together intimately because, right, your hunger and satiety, the hypothalamic, hunger and satiety circuitry, let's just call it, is, it's bound up with the reward processing, palatability, perception stuff.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And I mean, I think that's why the GLP-1 drugs, for example, are not only effective for weight loss, but they have these interesting side effects of people using less alcohol, using less drugs, doing gambling less. Like you see seems like every week I see some new headline about these knock-on effects, and they all seem to be brain related.
Yeah. So it might be generally, it's not just boosting satiety itself. It might be reducing reward sensitivity, and that includes food rewards, drug rewards, etc.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what the data point to. This isn't my work, but I'm reading the literature, and that's what I see.
Yeah. Is there any possible concern there, given that these drugs are new, that the chronic effects might be something to pay attention to, especially given the history of weight loss drugs like rimonabant?
100%. we need to be careful. Absolutely. And, I think we need to keep on monitoring what's going on. A couple of things that make this, I think, more likely to end up looking like it looks now, which is a pretty safe way to go, which is that these drugs, first of all, they're mimics of hormones that your body makes already.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one, I think, indicator that this is probably a promising therapy that way. They've been around in various forms in human use for medications for over 10 years. The new injectables are pretty new, but there's other ways of getting that drug, like Rybelsus is a diabetes drug that uses the same basic shape of a drug that has been around longer. And so far the safety profile looks pretty promising. I'm with you, that we have to be careful about this and need to keep monitoring. They don't get a free pass for surely. But I will say that we also know that the long-term health risks of obesity are not to be overlooked. I mean, those are serious. And so, I think if somebody's already at a healthy weight, I wouldn't play with these drugs. It's not worth it, right? But if you have a serious issue with obesity, we know that carries health risks, then, I think that the cost benefit analysis might change.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to say anything more about your book and what's in it, and kind of just reiterate what it's all about?
Sure. So it's adaptable.
Put it right parallel with your face so that's not
there we
blurred
go,
out.
like this.
Yeah. Let me see.
I don't know where I am. Good.
No, move it closer. Actually, let me see. move the book closer.
Oh, like this.
Yeah. No, you had it for just a second. It's blurry now.
It's blurry because my background's blurry.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No. Right there. There you go.
Okay.
Talk with it right there.
So Adaptable is a book about how your body works. We get into metabolism, of course, and diet, but we get into everything: how brains work, how muscles work, how growth works, how immune systems work. And the idea is to give people, in the same way that I've tried with my work in metabolism, to give people a kind of a fluency in how energy metabolism works, and then I'll talk about, too, why that matters for obesity and health. I think there's a story there in every aspect of our body, from our brains to our muscles to growth to reproduction to immune systems. All of it's important, right? And what I don't see out there in the influencer sphere is a lot of people talking about how our bodies work kind of at a fundamental level that's going to give people the kind of fluency they need to make good decisions about lifestyle, about healthcare, about the big discussion that we have in the US, surely, about things like IQ, race, gender, and sex. When does life begin, right? All of these big issues fundamentally rest on how we understand our bodies and how our bodies work and how they work differently. And so, the book isn't trying to get people to think like me or anything like that. It's not meant to sort of push you to have a particular set of opinions. But what I do want people to have is a shared space, a shared set of evidence and facts and fluency in how our bodies work, so that we can use to all have this discussion together in a more useful way.
All right. Well, Dr. Herman Pontzer, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Visit mindandmatter.substack.com to find all of my content. Hey everyone, I want to take just a minute to tell you about one of my cool new affiliate partners called Seed Oil Scout. Seed Oil Scout has a really cool map feature that helps you find restaurants in your area where you can find seed oil-free options. They also have a really cool product scanner, so you can take out the app and use the camera functionality of your phone to scan products in grocery stores and see what's actually in these things. Do they contain seed oils? Do they contain other things that you want to know about that aren't necessarily on the box? This will help you find places to eat and find foods to eat that actually have what you want in them and help you avoid those that don't. So if you're looking to cut back on your seed oil consumption, or you just want to know more about what's in the foods on the shelves at the grocery stores, download Seed Oil Scout today. If you go through the link in the episode description, click into that and you'll see a link to the Seed Oil Scout app. If you go through that link on my support page, you'll be directly helping the podcast, and you'll be able to download this really cool, easy to use app that will help you find healthier food options. So go through the link in the episode description and download Seed Oil Scout today.